everybody. Welcome to this week's Heart of CX podcast. I'm Max Ball. Joanna Palmer, you brought a guest today. Tell me all about it.
Yes, so excited, Max. We've got a guest on the show today, Naveed Hussain with Ring Central, who leads our industry principals. Like me, he came from the customer side as well. And today we're going to talk higher ed. Naveed, so happy to have you on today. Do you want to give us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. How are you? Thank you so much for having me. And well, backgrounds like yours. We both were customers, right? And we like Ring Central so much, and the people here that we're here now. I came from the UN, about 11 years of peacekeeping operations, and then my wife said, "Hey, you got to get a real job in country so you can raise your kids." And my first real job in the U.S. was as a CIO at Queens College at the City University of New York, and spent about 10 years there, and then came over to Columbia University and became CIO there and rebuilt their infrastructure. Now, the funny thing is that they kind of lied to me. They told me that they had a really good infrastructure, but they had a $10 million IT deficit. And by the way, I had to help raise the $32 million to get them out of that deficit and upgrade technology. So, it was like, you ever go to like Greenwich Village and they show you that coconut game and where's the card, or where's the coin? It was like that. It's a shell game, right? And I ended up at Teachers College where I met Ring Central and implemented it there.
Very cool.
That's the story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's awesome. And you know that shell game I am all too familiar with. So let's talk higher ed and being at both Columbia College and City College there. You definitely have the experience there. And when we think higher ed and we think contact center for higher ed, there's some definite unique use cases when it comes to university. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in that space.
Absolutely. Higher ed is new to contact center type capabilities, right? Because they've always kind of like tried to patch things together. There's never enough budget, so you use what you have and then you make it work, right? Traditional PBXs like our competitors, they had some capabilities, but every time you want to go do something, you have to upgrade the license and it costs a fortune and it's a huge challenge. And then you have to go get budget and things like this. But what they're realizing now as they come to technologies like ours, which are cloud-based and platform-based, right? It's really not a PBX that they're replacing. They're replacing hardware for software, and software always beats hardware, right?
Yep.
And you were on the buy side too. You saw like how you get rid of hardware and you go to the cloud, and it gives you so much more flexibility and agility, right? And so higher ed is driven by just one simple thought process, regardless of if you're faculty or if you're administration or whatever. It's student success, right? And the way student success works is around student experience, student graduation rates, right, and student retention. So if you can match those three metrics and make that an easy flow, it's great. So now what you're seeing is that you have students who have that entire experience from the point when they're prospective students to when they become alumni, right? So that's an entire life cycle that we're talking about. So when they're prospective students, people are connecting to them through Hobson's, which is their CRM system, or Slate, or something like that. But that needs to integrate into some sort of communication and collaboration solution. And that's what like Ring Central offers, right? That integration so that you have click to dial capabilities, you have that integration into Salesforce so that if you had a conversation with a student or an email exchange, you can capture that and stay within compliance with regards to FERPA, and capture all of that information, and then be able to take the information that you collected during the onboarding process or through the application and admissions process and move it into the registrar's office, and then eventually bursar and financial aid, and get all of those things. Collect the information once and use it many times, so that you're removing the barrier for the student from applying for financial aid, and you're removing that whole challenge of onboarding onto the campus, right? And that is just improving the entire experience of onboarding, right? And then you're including it into advising and registration and coursework and integration into their learning management system. So think about it as the whole campus, right? Connected campus.
Yes, I like that thought of the connected campus, and going back to the beginning of the student life cycle, the recruitment activities, and thinking about, gosh, way back when we were being recruited as students, versus what it's like now for students. Just preferences of how students prefer that universities contact them. What are you seeing there in terms of changes with outreach?
Oh, it's incredible because, I mean, our students are, I mean, look at your kids and students today just going, Gen Zers going into college, right? These guys are so comfortable with filling out a Common App, submitting it online, right?
Yeah.
And then they're getting text messages back from the school that this is when orientation is, or they're getting an email with a text message, or they're joining a Facebook group, right? That has all their friends in that Facebook group, and they're choosing their roommates over the summer through Facebook. They haven't even met these kids, right? I say kids because I'm old, but they haven't met these, students, right? And they're meeting them online. And what's challenging for the school is that you've got all this data sprawl happening in messaging systems like Facebook and WhatsApp and things like that are not in their BAA or business agreements, right? So there's no coverage for security, and there's all this information being exchanged that you have no control over. So what schools are now doing is creating, their own little, communication pods, right? So like our GLIP messaging system, allowing them to have a channel within there so that they can communicate, share pictures, share information about themselves so that it's encrypted and secure, and it's end-to-end communication. And it's a cool thing that we offer in our program is that we charge for the school to use our applications, right? But we don't charge the students anything. So the students can onboard into the system, and they can communicate with faculty up front, they can communicate with administrators, they can communicate with each other, they can do videos. It's a lot more immersive, and it's safe, right? And that's kind of what the school is looking for. And then when you get into, what you were talking about is this contact center with the bursar office and financial aid, getting them that information. Be ready to fill out that Pell Grant application. Here it is, right? And doing bulk messaging to these students and making sure that it doesn't end up on a spam list or something so the message doesn't come across. All of that is a balance. Communication at universities has always been a challenge, and engaging students will continue to be a challenge. But now the tools are making it easier because they're more native to where the students are.
So how do you get issues with adoption of these apps? I mean, I can see I can get to my professor in a way I couldn't before. I could see that being pretty desirable, but especially like early on when you're still in recruiting mode, I'm assuming at that point you don't really get them in the app. It's more once they're there and in the school.
Yeah. Sometimes some schools do it, right? Where they'll send them the app and say, hey, download the app and it'll be easier to communicate, right? And students are so excited about joining the school that they'll comply and download it, right? But unless there's actual content in the app, they're not going to keep coming back to it, right? You have to keep giving them endorphins, right? So So that's always a challenge. And some schools are really good at it because they appoint like student ambassadors to go communicate with other students, right? And students are good about taking care of each other.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I mean that student ambassador program is really good. Like my son, I'll tell you, my younger son, he's going to Cal, right? And he hasn't been on campus because of COVID. And this year will be the first year that he's on campus, and we had to rent him an apartment, and he wasn't even able to get housing, right? Because they have housing for freshmen, but no housing for sophomores. But not only has he not been to campus, but he is a campus orientation instructor or whatever. He's going to give orientation to students coming to campus, and he himself has never been on campus, apart from when we went to look for his apartment.
That's super comical. That's really funny. So speaking of COVID and just the impact and what we're seeing now with this Delta variant, what sort of impacts do you think that will have on the universities come fall? What do they need to think about from a communications perspective?
Oh, it's clear that COVID is going to be with us forever, in one variation or another, right? Today we have the Delta variant, which is causing a stir. But the reality is that through vaccination and through adoption and masking and various precautions that are going to be necessary for us to adopt into our normal processes, right? I think we're going to be able to get back to life. And that's what schools want to do now, is return these kids back to school, bring them in, and bring them in a comfortable environment, in an environment. Are you ready to come back to school? Then come to campus. If you're not ready to come back to school and you want to continue to take your classes online, then go ahead and take your classes online. So schools are very open-minded because enrollment is down, so they need to be open-minded, right? But two, they need to adapt, right? And so in order to adapt, they have to be ultra sensitive to making sure that students coming onto campus are safe, right? Safety has all, because we as parents demand it, right? But overall, these students are now in the responsibility in the hands of these administrators, right? Who have basically taken a vow to protect our kids and help them graduate and become valuable individuals in society. So, and they have to keep in mind that it's a university or a campus is not a corporation. So Ring Central can tell you and me that, hey, you have to be fully vaccinated before you come on campus, right? But a public university can't do that. Though there are a couple of public universities that are doing that. And there are universities that are private that are now starting to say, if you're not vaccinated, we'll charge you an extra $1,500 a semester if you want to come on campus. So incentivize them based on the behavior that you want them to do, right? Around these things. But now, how do I track them? How do I track and trace these outbreaks, right? Because students, what are they going to do? You and I were students at one time too, and we told our parents we would not party and we would study really hard. What's the first thing you do that first weekend you're back on campus? Party! I mean, there's more beer drunk that weekend than probably any other weekend on campus, right? Everybody's back. They want to socialize. They want to meet each other. They want to hug each other. Forget about masking and safety. You could, ideally say this is great, but we're going to have to incorporate contact tracing into the thought process.
Yes.
This is where the contact center becomes really crucial, because now, again, we're talking about software. We're not talking about the legacy on-prem systems anymore, right? So now you can incorporate them into the school application, right? And you can pick up on Bluetooth, and you can pick up on Wi-Fi. You can see where these students are hiving and getting together and not social distancing, right? So we can see some of that. But you have to be also very transparent that we will be using hiving technology and we will be using contact tracing technology to keep you safe, right? And you have to vote, you have the right, the right to know document as a student. You have the right to know that this is what we're going to be doing. And you have the right to subscribe or unsubscribe. But if you unsubscribe, you're theoretically endangering your fellow students, right? So you have a responsibility to each other to keep each other safe. And I think when you appeal to students at that level and you say, this is not about big brothering you or monitoring you, this is really about keeping you safe. And you only have to share that information which is absolutely necessary, like your cell phone number, that we know that you were in a certain area and you were exposed to potentially infected people. We want to contact you. We want to make sure that you do take the right precautions and keep that social distance so you don't come to class and you infect others and things like this. So contact tracing is going to be part of that that toolkit that the universities are going to have. And then, again, making your medical centers available, your faculty aware and your students aware, and making sure that the messaging goes out in a timely manner. So bulk messaging is going to be critical. Bulk SMS is going to be vital to communication.
Yeah. And so, it's interesting seeing some of this proliferate in terms of the outbound messaging, the outbound phone calls to the students, but also that mass messaging as well. And then leveraging the video continuously or throughout, and having that blended learning as well to enable in class as well as remote learning opportunities.
You touched on a great point, Joanna, blended learning, right? And hybrid learning.
Yeah.
That is even more important today than it was when we built the classroom of the future at Columbia, right? We did it because we wanted to do remote lessons with Brazil and Argentina and all of these places and give them the same immersive experience on campus. But now it's really about inclusivity and the measures that we've taken for accessibility on our platform, right? We actually based it on a WCAG 2.0, 2.1 standard. We didn't make it up. We didn't say that this is our voluntary accessibility attestation, right? And just give it out and say this is where we are. We actually based it on a standard so that it would be transparent to any university or any customer of ours that would look at the standard and say, this is the accessibility standard that RingCentral adheres to. And this is what they're working towards, right? And continuously improving. So inclusion in public higher ed and private higher ed and in K-12 education in general is so important today because we don't want to leave our students behind just because they couldn't come on campus, right? New York State has a law that it requires you to print some of the rules and some of the documentation in the forms because there's a digital gap, right? Digital divide. And just as there's a digital divide, there is a digital divide in learning, right? So we need to make sure that the technology we offer has that inclusive capability, right? So always think from who will be left on the fringe first, and then bring them in so that you don't leave anyone behind. So it's so important today, especially with hybrid learning, that we have this thought process.
Yeah, definitely.
So, you've been talking about making hybrid not exclusionary. What does hybrid do in terms of expanding who you can reach out to?
Yeah, it's a good point, right? So when you have students who were, special in many cases, they would get special treatment because they were hybrid and you'd have to do special things for them, right? And it was a lot more costly to be able to get all of the technology over to them. Now, it's so much easier, right? Video has become a norm. So even the student who, was one-off, right, in their room and they couldn't come to campus because of some disability or because they had to take care of their kids or things like that. And think about, like all these students who are single parents who couldn't come to campus, right? And they had to pay for for babysitting and things like that. And it was a barrier. Now you've removed that barrier because now we've made it natural for it to be hybrid.
Right.
Harlem, you just heard it. So now what you've actually done, and hybrid's actually done this inclusive thing a little bit better, because before it was special, now it's a norm. So everybody thinks about it. It's now part of the learning management system, right? So you're doing a click to start a class. So it's automatic rather than it being another step. It's part of the workflow. And the more natural it becomes, you'll see the syllabus change for the faculty. You'll see the assets that the students develop and share with the faculty become more naturally available through messaging and things like that, and then feed into the artifacts, into the learning management system. And then when universities go for their accreditations on every 2 years and every 5 years, they'll have the assets already available in the rubrics. As a matter of fact, we're in the process of doing a go-to-market with Desire to Learn, where we're going to build even a bigger integration into, not only do we have that integration into Canvas and Blackboard and Moodle, but we're building an even deeper integration into Canvas, so that when universities get into middle states and NCATE accreditation, they'll have the rubrics ready to go for the auditors to come in and look at, and then they can just share those rubrics up front even before the auditors arrive on campus, making accreditation so much simpler rather than a chore.
Very cool. Very cool. So taking this back to the beginning, where the overall goal here for the student life cycle is really getting them to graduate, and thinking about post-graduation with interactions with the university as well. Thinking about alumni and some of those interactions within the university context center. Tell us about some of those use cases as well, and how technology can enhance that.
Sure. So let's get to the brass tacks. When you and I think about alumni, what do we think about? Donations, right? So that's the brass tacks. We had an advancement leader at one time who said, get them to give you $50. Once they get used to giving you $50, they'll get used to giving you the bigger gifts. Because if they are in the spirit of giving and they regularly give, they'll think about the school and they'll think about all the great experiences, right? And if you've done everything possible to have the student experience be immersive and to build school spirit and things like that, so you have days where you do a spirit day and you make all the students wear the school shirt, right, or school colors or whatever it is, right? Get them really excited. They'll remember those things when they become alumni. But what they'll also remember are the relationships that they had with each other and how they carried each other through those deep learning classes where there were so many papers to read and so much to write about and so much to do, that they shared the documentation and they split it up and they worked on it together, right? And now they're doing it through messaging, or they're doing it through a video, or they're doing it, but they're still working together. They're still collaborating, right? That experience is still strong, and they've lived through this COVID thing, right? I think that'll be like the great generation of World War I and things like this, that having gone through this huge challenge in life, right? Stop the whole 7 billion people, stop going to work. That's pretty incredible. They've lived through that experience, and that experience is then going to lead into that alumni experience, where they're going to think back and say, how do I help the cohort that comes behind me, right? How do I mentor them into a job, into my company, so that they can get jobs? Or how do I give back to the university, right? Or now when you do those phonathons, right? Remember those phonathons? We did this, right, for athletics, right? You would sit in this big multi-purpose room, right? And you'd all be on a phone, and you're still calling, and you're looking at these sheets of paper that were, on these green and white papers. And these kids don't know what these green and white bar papers are anymore, right? and they would scratch out the number, and you call Mr. Stewart or whatever it was, Now you don't have to do that. Now what we do is we integrate into the Blackbaud system, right? And the alumni comes up, right? And then you do click to dial, you know a little bit about the alumni, and you know who you're talking to, and you know what you're going to ask them, and you have a script, and you can do this without being in the multipurpose room. You can do this on your own laptop. You could do it on the school laptop, your iPhone, right? Whatever it is, your Android, and you can do these calls and reach out without having these major phonathons and things like this. And you can do it from the convenience. It allows you to involve more students, give them more credits, and you know more tchotchkes and student T-shirts and things like this. And it just involves more students across the board. So it becomes easier. And you know what? I bet you'll see an impact of fundraising. Fundraising will be a lot easier, and you'll see a lot more smaller donations coming in, which will have a larger impact than the bigger donations that are coming in. Look at NPR, for example. It completely lives on donations, right? And how do they do it? It's the smaller donations that outweigh the bigger donations.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that this is really a great place to stop on for today in terms of it is all about the connections. It's all about the relationships. It's all about enabling communication and collaboration more readily, more easily, and having that modernized contact center, that modernized communication platform such as RingCentral enables us to do just that, to provide the collaboration, to provide the connection more readily. Anything you'd like to add, Naveed?
Yeah, I mean, look, we talked a lot about the experience, right, and the connected campus, and one thing I would like to leave everyone with is that technology is getting easier, and it's getting easier because it's platform based and integration based and things like this. What we want to leave with is a thought about reliability and leadership, right? Companies that invest in R&D, right? Companies that will sustain and keep the systems up, right? Because there's nothing worse for adoption of a technology is if you get online and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're trying to do something and it doesn't work.
Absolutely.
And that's like the worst experience faculty can have, the students can have, and the administrators can have, right? So the fact that we build our technology with this high availability +1, reliability, and the fact that we maintain our 5 nines and we talk about it in contracts and things like this, it's important. But when making these decisions, also think about the relationships that the companies have with integration providers and the availability, because the weakest point is what impacts your entire service, right? So if that integration isn't solid and the company is not serious about what they're doing in that vertical, your experience in that industry is going to be negative. So making that decision, think about a single investment that you can use multiple times in something that's solid and that will grow with you as an organization and a company that will be your partner and wants to do more in your industry.
Yep, that makes sense. So thank you so much, Naveed, for so many insights today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I just love tooting the horn for RingCentral as well. So it's kind of cool.
Kind of cool.
All
The
right.
perfect phrase to wrap up on. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.